The gavel's echo hadn't even faded when my father's voice boomed across the courtroom. "She's an absolute embarrassment to this family," the gallery gasped. I shrank into my chair, trembling. But then, Judge Gregory Hamilton slowly took off his glasses, leaned over the bench, and asked him one single, terrifying question. To understand how I ended up sitting at a defendant's table in Cook County Courtroom 402, fighting for my basic human rights, you have to understand my father. Roman Mitchell wasn't just a businessman. He was an institution in Chicago real estate. If you drove past a high-rise with gleaming glass and a ludicrously expensive lobby, chances are his company, Mitchell and Webb Holdings, owned it. He was a man who measured love in ROI and viewed his children as extensions of his corporate brand. My older sister, Joelle, was the perfect subsidiary. She married a corporate banker, lived in a pristine 6-bedroom estate in Lake Forest, and played the socialite game flawlessly. I, on the other hand, was the PR nightmare. My name is Claire. I'm a middle school art teacher, living in a cramped, walk-up apartment in Logan Square. I drive a 2012 Honda Civic that squeals when I brake, and I have exactly zero interest in country club galas. For 26 years, my father barely tolerated me. I was the bohemian phase that never ended, the constant disappointment at Thanksgiving dinners. He called my career a cute hobby, and regularly asked when I was going to get a real job that didn't involve wiping paint off 12-year-olds. We existed in a state of cold, mutual avoidance. Until my grandmother, Beatrice Hawthorne, passed away. Grammy B was my mother's mother, and the only person in the family who actually saw me. When her will was unsealed in late September, the family dynamic shattered. She didn't leave her estate to my father, nor did she leave it to Joelle. She left the Hawthorne Family Trust, a liquid asset portfolio worth just over $4.2 million entirely to me. The day the executor, a mild-mannered man named Thomas Gable from Wellington Financial, read the will, the silence in my father's oak-paneled study was deafening. My father's jaw locked. His face drained of color, then flushed with a deep, dangerous crimson. "There's been a mistake," Roman said, his voice dropping an octave. Beatrice was not in her right mind. Claire doesn't even know how to balance a checkbook, let alone manage a multi-million-dollar trust. Mr. Gable adjusted his spectacles. "I assure you, Roman, Mrs. Hawthorne was exceptionally lucid. The medical evaluations from Dr. Cho at Northwestern Memorial confirm it. The funds are legally Claire's, effective immediately. I didn't want the money for power. I wanted to use it to fund an arts program for underprivileged kids in the city, something Grammy B and I had dreamed about, but my father had other plans. What I didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Mitchell and Webb Holdings was quietly hemorrhaging money. Roman had over-leveraged himself on a massive commercial development downtown that had stalled due to zoning issues and supply chain failures. He was drowning in 9 figures of debt, and his creditors were circling. To him, my inheritance wasn't my future, it was his lifeline. 2 weeks after the reading of the will, my father called me into his office. He poured himself a scotch, a Macallan 18. I remember the bottle sitting on the mahogany desk, and smiled. It was the kind of smile a shark gives before it bites. "Claire, sweetheart," he began, the fake warmth making my skin crawl. "I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I want to protect you. $4 million is a massive burden. People will take advantage of you. I've had my attorneys draft up a simple management agreement. You sign the funds over to my wealth management team, and we'll pay you a generous monthly stipend, $50,000 a year, tax-free." I stared at him. "You want me to hand over Grammy's money so you can control it?" "Manage it, Claire," he corrected sharply. "You're an art teacher. You wear thrift store sweaters. You are completely unequipped for this. Sign the paper." "No," I said softly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Grammy trusted me with it. I'm going to use it the way we discussed." His hand slammed onto the desk, the scotch sloshing over the rim of his glass. "You ungrateful little brat. You think you can walk out of here with my family's money? You have no idea what you're playing with." I left his office shaking, but I thought that was the end of it. A tantrum from a controlling man who didn't get his way. I was horribly, naively wrong. 3 days later, I was in my classroom hanging up my students' watercolor projects when 2 Cook County Sheriff's deputies walked in. They weren't there to ask questions. They handed me a thick stack of legal documents. I scanned the bold black letters at the top of the first page: petition for plenary guardianship and conservatorship. My father wasn't just suing me for the money. He was petitioning the court to strip me of my basic legal rights, claiming I was mentally incompetent, severely unstable, and a danger to myself. The petition requested that Roman Mitchell be granted full control over my medical decisions, my living arrangements, and of course my finances. The legal documents read like a work of fiction, yet they were terrifyingly real. My father had hired a high-powered, ruthless attorney named Ted Carmichael from Carmichael, Reed & Associates. Ted was notorious in Chicago for destroying reputations to win cases. In the petition, they included an affidavit from a doctor, Alan Forrester, a private psychiatrist I had never met, claiming he had reviewed my behavioral history and concluded I suffered from severe manic episodes and debilitating paranoia. They cited a brief period in college when I took a semester off for anxiety as proof of long-standing psychiatric fragility. Worse, they included doctored bank statements. Years ago, when I was 18, my father had set up a joint checking account for my college expenses. I hadn't used it in nearly a decade, assuming it was closed. But Roman had quietly reactivated it, transferring large sums of money in and out, making it look like I was gambling and making reckless, erratic purchases at high-end boutiques and casinos. I was terrified. A conservatorship meant I wouldn't be able to vote, sign a lease, marry, or spend a single dollar without my father's permission. He was trying to lock me in a legal cage to steal my inheritance. I desperately needed help, so I emptied my modest savings and hired Rebecca Dawson. Rebecca wasn't a corporate shark. She was a fierce, scrappy family law attorney operating out of a cramped office on West Wacker Drive. She had messy brown hair, a permanent coffee stain on her blazer, and a mind like a steel trap. "Your father is building a paper fortress," Rebecca told me on our first meeting, aggressively highlighting lines in the petition. "It's a classic wealthy abuser tactic. Overwhelm the court with manufactured evidence of instability, bank on his pristine public reputation, and steamroll the judge before you even have a chance to defend yourself." "But it's all lies," I cried. "I don't even know this Dr. Forrester." "We'll prove that," Rebecca said, her eyes narrowing. "But right now you need to prepare yourself. They are going to drag your name through the mud. They will find anyone who has ever had a grievance against you and pay them to testify. Who is your weakest link, Claire? Think." I didn't have to think hard. My ex-boyfriend, Derek Sullivan. Derek and I had broken up 8 months prior. He was an aspiring actor who couldn't keep a job, and I had finally gotten tired of paying his rent and dealing with his toxic jealousy. When I kicked him out, he swore he would make me regret it. Sure enough, when the witness list for the hearing was delivered to Rebecca's office, Derek's name was right there, sitting smugly at the top. The weeks leading up to the trial were a waking nightmare. My sister Joelle blocked my number. My aunts and uncles suddenly stopped inviting me to family gatherings. My father had poisoned the well, painting himself as the tragic, loving father trying to save his mentally ill daughter from ruining her life. The isolation was suffocating. There were nights I lay on my worn-out rug, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I should just sign the money over to make the nightmare stop. But then I'd think of Grammy B, her warm hands holding mine, telling me to be brave. The morning of the hearing, the sky over Chicago was the color of bruised iron. Cook County Courtroom 402 smelled of lemon polish and stale anxiety. My father sat at the petitioner's table, dressed in a bespoke charcoal brioni suit, looking like a man about to attend a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Jolie sat directly behind him in the gallery, wearing designer sunglasses indoors, refusing to make eye contact with me. Presiding over the case was the Honorable Judge Gregory Hamilton. He was in his late 60s, with sharp, perceptive eyes and a reputation for being strictly by the book. Ted Carmichael stood up to deliver his opening statement, and the character assassination began. "Your Honor," Carmichael's voice was smooth, carrying a sickening undertone of fake sympathy. We are here today on a heartbreaking family matter. Roman Mitchell, a respected pillar of this community, is stepping in to save his daughter Claire from her own tragic unraveling. We will show that Claire suffers from profound psychiatric distress. We will show a pattern of reckless spending, erratic behavior, and an inability to manage even the most basic aspects of adult life. The sudden influx of a $4 million trust is not a blessing for Claire. It is a loaded weapon placed in the hands of someone who doesn't know how to use the safety. I gripped the edge of the mahogany table so hard my knuckles turned white. Rebecca placed a steadying hand on my arm. Then, they called Derek to the stand. Derek walked up wearing a suit that was clearly brand new, probably bought with my father's money. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, then immediately began to lie through his teeth. Under Carmichael's guidance, Derek painted a picture of a monster. He claimed I would go days without sleeping, pacing the apartment and talking to myself. He claimed I threw plates at him in unprovoked fits of rage. She was completely unhinged, Derek said, looking at the judge with practiced puppy dog eyes. I tried to get her help, I really did, but she'd just scream that everyone was out to get her. When she found out about the money, she told me she was going to blow it all in Vegas in a week. I'm really worried for her, Your Honor. I felt physically sick. The judge was taking notes, his expression unreadable. Next was Dr. Forrester, the psychiatrist I'd never met. He testified via video link, citing telehealth evaluations that never happened. He used big, clinical words: bipolar type 1, severe executive dysfunction, paranoid ideation. Rebecca objected fiercely, demanding proof of these telehealth meetings, but Carmichael smoothly produced a log of phone calls. They were calls from a burner phone, timed perfectly to look like hour-long sessions. My father had thought of everything. By the time the court recessed for lunch, I was utterly defeated. I sat in a cold corner of the courthouse cafeteria, unable to eat the stale sandwich in front of me. "They're winning," I whispered, tears finally spilling over. "He's going to take my life away, Rebecca. The judge believes them." Rebecca took a sip of her black coffee, her eyes scanning the notes she had scribbled during the morning session. "They've put on a good show, Claire, but a fortress built on paper burns easily if you find the right match. We just need to catch Roman in his own arrogance." We returned to the courtroom for the afternoon session. It was my father's turn to take the stand. Roman walked to the witness box with the supreme confidence of a man who owned the building. He smiled sadly at the judge. He played the part of the grieving, desperate father to absolute perfection. "I love my daughter," Roman said, his voice actually cracking with manufactured emotion. "It breaks my heart to do this, but she is unwell. She's an embarrassment to herself, and if I don't step in, she will end up on the streets, or worse." Carmichael asked, "Mr. Mitchell, your daughter claims you are doing this solely to gain access to the Hawthorne Trust Fund. Is that true?" My father let out a soft, patronizing chuckle. "Your Honor, I am the CEO of Mitchell and Webb Holdings. My personal net worth is public record. I don't need my daughter's money. I only want to place it in a secure, court-monitored account so she can't destroy her future." He looked so convincing. The gallery murmured in sympathy. Even the court reporter looked at him with pity. But as my father sat there, basking in the glow of his own successful manipulation, he didn't realize that arrogance makes you sloppy. He didn't realize that Rebecca Dawson wasn't just a scrappy lawyer. She was a bloodhound. And over the lunch break, she had received an email from an anonymous whistleblower inside Mitchell and Webb Holdings, a document that was about to turn Cook County Courtroom 402 completely upside down. When court reconvened, the air in the room felt heavier, charged with the kind of static electricity that precedes a violent storm. My father, Roman, was still in the witness box, looking relaxed and entirely too pleased with his morning performance. Ted Carmichael, his high-priced shark of an attorney, sat at the petitioner's table with a smug, victorious smile plastered across his face. Rebecca Dawson stood up. She didn't smooth her wrinkled blazer. She didn't offer a polite smile to the judge. She just picked up a plain manila folder and walked toward the center of the room. "Mr. Mitchell," Rebecca began, her voice calm but carrying a sharp metallic edge, You testified earlier that your personal net worth is public record and that you have absolutely no financial need for the $4 million left to your daughter by Beatrice Hawthorne. Is that correct? That is correct, Roman replied, his tone dripping with paternal condescension. My company, Mitchell & Webb Holdings, manages over $2 billion in commercial assets. Claire's inheritance is a drop in the bucket. This is purely about her well-being. $2 billion in assets, Rebecca repeated slowly, letting the number hang in the air. But assets are not liquidity, are they, Mr. Mitchell? In fact, assets can be heavily leveraged. Carmichael shot out of his chair. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. We are here to discuss the respondent's mental capacity, not my client's corporate balance sheets. Judge Gregory Hamilton peered over his reading glasses. Counselor, you opened the door to Mr. Mitchell's financial standing when you used it to establish his lack of motive. I'll allow it, but Miss Dawson, tread carefully. Thank you, Your Honor, Rebecca said. She opened the manila folder. Mr. Mitchell, isn't it true that your flagship project, the downtown commercial plaza, has been stalled for 14 months due to catastrophic supply chain failures and zoning lawsuits? My father's jaw tightened infinitesimally. Every large-scale development faces minor delays. Minor delays, Rebecca echoed. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. During the lunch recess, my office received a secure, encrypted communication from an individual who wishes to remain anonymous, but who possesses intimate, high-level knowledge of Mitchell & Webb's internal accounting. Attached to this communication was an internal memo drafted by your chief financial officer, William Covington. The blood completely drained from my father's face. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. In the gallery, my sister Jolie suddenly sat up rigidly, her designer sunglasses slipping down the bridge of her nose. Objection, Carmichael roared, his face flushing red. Your Honor, this is an ambush. We have not been provided with this supposed document in discovery. Because it was acquired 30 minutes ago, Your Honor, Rebecca fired back, handing a copy to the bailiff to pass to the judge, and another to a visibly sweating Carmichael. It is a verified internal corporate document that speaks directly to the petitioner's motive for filing this fraudulent guardianship. Judge Hamilton scanned the document, his bushy eyebrows rising toward his hairline. I will allow it. Proceed, Miss Dawson. Mr. Docking. Mitchell. Rebecca's voice rang through the silent courtroom. According to this memo, Mitchell & Webb Holdings is not merely experiencing minor delays. You are in default on a $120 million commercial loan. Your creditors have initiated preliminary foreclosure proceedings, and your corporate accounts are currently frozen. Is that not true? Those are private corporate matters that are entirely out of context, Roman snapped, gripping the edges of the witness stand. The polished, grieving father persona was beginning to fracture. Let's talk about context, then. Rebecca pivoted seamlessly. Let's talk about the sudden reactivation of Claire's old college checking account. You claimed she was spending erratically, pointing to bank statements showing wild purchases at casinos and high-end boutiques over the last 3 weeks. The statements speak for themselves, Roman growled. They do, Rebecca agreed. I subpoenaed the IP logs for the online banking portal of that specific joint account. The logs show that the sudden influx of transfers and the online purchases were all authorized from a single IP address, not Claire's apartment in Logan Square. Do you know who owns the IP address that logged into that account 42 times in the last month, Mr. Mitchell? My father said nothing. His chest was heaving. It's the dedicated IP address for your private executive suite at Mitchell & Webb Holdings, Rebecca stated, slamming the log printout onto the rail of the witness stand. You logged into an account Claire hadn't touched in 8 years, funneled your own company's money through it, and fabricated a paper trail to make your daughter look like an out-of-control gambling addict. The gallery erupted in shocked whispers. Objection! Carmichael yelled, completely losing his composure. Speculation! Anyone could have used that computer. And the telehealth psychiatric evaluations? Rebecca pressed on, ignoring the lawyer and locking eyes with my father. Dr. Forrester testified that he evaluated Claire via phone calls. We pulled the phone records for the burner number he used. The location data pinged the cell tower directly above your corporate headquarters. You paid a disgraced private psychiatrist to fake medical records, and you paid your daughter's ex-boyfriend to commit perjury, all because you are drowning in debt and you needed her $4 million to cover a margin call. You ungrateful, malicious little girl. The words ripped through the courtroom like a gunshot. My father had completely lost it. He wasn't looking at Rebecca anymore. He was glaring directly at me, his eyes burning with a terrifying, unhinged rage. The polished veneer of the billionaire CEO had shattered, revealing the desperate, cornered predator underneath. Carmichael practically lunged across his table. "Roman, sit down and be quiet," he hissed aggressively. But Roman Mitchell was a man who was entirely unaccustomed to being challenged, let alone exposed in a public forum, by a daughter he viewed as beneath his notice. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me. "I gave you everything," he shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You were a mistake from the day you were born. You throw away your life playing with paint while I build an empire. That money belongs to the Mitchell family, not to some pathetic, bleeding-heart teacher who doesn't understand how the real world works." I shrank back into my chair, the familiar, suffocating terror of my childhood washing over me. Even now, exposed and cornered, his anger was paralyzing. "Mr. Mitchell, you will control yourself or I will hold you in contempt," Judge Hamilton bellowed, slamming his gavel down with a crack that made everyone jump. But my father was too far gone. He leaned over the rail of the witness box, his face twisted in disgust. "She's an absolute embarrassment to this family," he roared. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence where you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Jolie had covered her mouth with her hands. The court reporter's fingers were frozen over her stenograph machine. Ted Carmichael closed his eyes and slowly sank back into his chair, the universal posture of a lawyer who knows his case has just flatlined. I sat frozen, tears finally spilling down my cheeks, the words echoing in my head, an embarrassment. Judge Gregory Hamilton did not reach for his gavel again. Instead, he slowly, deliberately took off his reading glasses and folded them on his desk. He looked at my father with an expression of such profound, glacial contempt that the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The judge leaned forward, steepling his fingers, and fixed his gaze on Roman. "Mr. Mitchell." Judge Hamilton's voice was dangerously quiet, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "You have just stated, for the public record, that your daughter is utterly incompetent. You have stated that she is mentally unstable, completely incapable of managing her own affairs, and a profound embarrassment to your family name." Roman swallowed hard, his chest still heaving, finally realizing the catastrophic error he had just made. "Your Honor, Do not interrupt me," the judge snapped, freezing Roman in place. Judge Hamilton picked up a final document from the stack Rebecca had handed the bailiff. He held it up. "If your daughter is so profoundly incompetent, Mr. Mitchell, and if she is such a staggering embarrassment to your business empire," the judge paused, letting the weight of the moment hang, "then why did you use her name and forge her signature to list her as the primary financial guarantor on a $94 million commercial bridge loan with Chase Manhattan just 72 hours ago?" The courtroom gasped collectively. It was a physical shockwave. I looked at Rebecca, my mouth open in shock. She gave me a tiny, fierce nod. The whistleblower hadn't just exposed the bankruptcy. They had exposed the ultimate crime. My father hadn't just wanted my $4 million. He had needed my pristine credit, my clean legal name, and the collateral of my newly acquired trust fund to secure a desperate, last-minute bailout loan to save his company. Because of his massive debt and pending foreclosures, no bank would lend to him. So, he had stolen my identity. The conservatorship wasn't just to get the cash, it was to gain retroactive legal cover for the $94 million fraud he had just committed in my name. Roman opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Carmichael, but his lawyer was already busy aggressively shuffling papers into his briefcase. silently distancing himself from a client who had just confessed to federal wire fraud and identity theft in open court. "Your Honor," Carmichael muttered, standing up hastily, "I believe I need to request a brief recess to confer with my client regarding his Fifth Amendment rights." "You do that, Counselor," Judge Hamilton said, his voice dripping with disdain. He turned his attention back to my father. "Mr. Mitchell, I am instantly denying your petition for guardianship with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering the bailiff to take you into custody right now, pending a criminal investigation into aggravated identity theft, bank fraud, and perjury." Two Cook County Sheriff's deputies instantly stepped forward from the back of the courtroom, moving briskly toward the witness stand. "Wait, no!" Roman panicked, stumbling backward against the wooden chair as the deputies grabbed his arms. "You can't do this. I am Roman Mitchell. I built this city. Jolie, call the board." "Call Simon." Jolie didn't move. She stared straight ahead, completely paralyzed as our father was handcuffed. "Take him out," Judge Hamilton ordered. As they marched him down the center aisle, his bespoke Brioni suit rumpled, his wrists bound in steel, he looked at me one last time. There was no rage left in his eyes, only the terrified realization that the daughter he had spent 26 years calling an embarrassment was the only one walking out of that courtroom free. The echo of the courtroom doors swinging shut behind my father felt like the breaking of a decades-old curse. I collapsed into my chair, the adrenaline rapidly draining from my system, leaving me shaking uncontrollably. Rebecca packed her manila folders into her battered leather briefcase with the quiet satisfaction of a general who had just won a war with a single, perfectly timed strike. "You okay, kid?" she asked, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. I nodded, wiping a tear that had finally managed to escape. "Is it really over? For you?" "Yes," Rebecca smiled, snapping her briefcase shut. "For Roman, his nightmare is just beginning." She wasn't exaggerating. The fallout from the hearing in courtroom 402 was biblical in its proportions. The moment Judge Hamilton ordered my father into custody, the dominoes of his fragile corporate empire began to topple. By 5 o'clock that evening, agents from the FBI's white-collar crime division were hauling boxes of hard drives and financial ledgers out of the Mitchell and Webb corporate headquarters on Wacker Drive. The $94 million bridge loan, which Roman had fraudulently secured by forging my signature and putting up my inheritance as collateral, was immediately frozen. Chase Manhattan launched its own aggressive internal investigation, and when the dust settled, Mitchell and Webb Holdings was forced into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The high-rises, the luxury lobbies, the country club memberships, it all vanished, seized by creditors who had been lied to for years. But my father wasn't the only one who faced a reckoning. Ted Carmichael, realizing the radioactive nature of his client, officially withdrew as Roman's counsel the very next morning, citing irreconcilable conflicts. He barely escaped a state bar disciplinary hearing himself, though his reputation as Chicago's untouchable legal shark took a permanent, devastating hit. Then there was Derek, my spineless ex-boyfriend, who had sat on the stand and spun malicious lies for a payout, suddenly found himself the target of a perjury investigation. 2 days after the trial, he left 3 weeping voicemails on my phone, begging for forgiveness and claiming Roman had threatened him. I didn't call him back. I forwarded the voicemails to Rebecca, who promptly handed them over to the state's attorney. Derek was formally charged with perjury and spent 6 months in a county jail, a far cry from the glamorous acting career he had envisioned. Dr. Forrester, the disgraced psychiatrist who had fabricated my medical records from a burner phone, had his medical license permanently revoked by the state medical board. He is currently awaiting trial for criminal fraud and conspiracy. As for the anonymous whistleblower, it turned out to be William Covington, my father's chief financial officer. William had realized that Roman's illegal maneuvering with the Chase Manhattan loan was going to send the entire executive board to federal prison. In a desperate bid for immunity, he had leaked the internal memos to Rebecca and simultaneously handed the company's cooked books over to the SEC. The most complicated casualty of it all was my sister, Jolie. A week after our father was indicted on 22 counts of federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft, she showed up at my walk-up apartment in Logan Square. She wasn't wearing her designer sunglasses. She looked exhausted, her perfect veneer cracked by the realization that her entire privileged life had been funded by a house of cards. She stood on my welcome mat and awkwardly offered me a half-hearted apology, asking if we could band together during this difficult family crisis. I looked at the sister who had ignored my calls, who had sat in the gallery, ready to watch me lose my basic human rights, and I felt nothing but a profound sense of peace. "I'm sorry, Joel," I told her gently but firmly, "but I'm not a Mitchell anymore. I'm a Hawthorne." I closed the door, finally severing the last toxic tie to my past. With the legal battles definitively won, the $4 million from Grammy B's trust was transferred into my sole, uncontested control, completely untouched by the wreckage of my father's bankruptcy. I didn't quit my job as a middle school art teacher. I loved my students too much. But I did buy a slightly better car, a reliable Subaru that didn't squeal when I hit the brakes. The rest of the money, every single cent of the principal and its interest, went exactly where my grandmother and I had always intended. 8 months after the gavel fell in courtroom 402, I cut a bright red ribbon on a renovated brick warehouse in the West Loop. Above the doors, painted in bold, vibrant colors by my own students, read the sign, "The Beatrice Hawthorne Youth Arts Center." It is a fully funded, free admission studio for underprivileged kids in Chicago to learn painting, sculpture, and graphic design. It is a place of warmth, creativity, and safety, everything my childhood was not. My father is currently serving a 12-year sentence in a federal correctional institution in Indiana. I don't visit him. I don't write to him. The man who called me an embarrassment is nothing more than a ghost, a cautionary tale of greed that I left behind in a dusty courtroom. In the end, the greatest inheritance Grammy B left me wasn't the millions in the bank, it was the courage to stand my ground. My father tried to build a cage out of his wealth, but he ended up locking himself inside. True power isn't about controlling others or amassing a corporate empire. It's about knowing your own worth, walking in your truth, and painting your own beautifully unscripted future.